Series 2. 1. Is the First Amendment being misrepresented? A number of groups have attacked the church and churchmen for getting involved in politics. These criticisms are particularly aimed against evangelical groups formed to deal with various moral issues and legal attacks on churches and Christian schools. These critics charge that such activities are a violation of the First Amendment and the separation of church and state. However, the First Amendment was written to prevent the establishment of a national church by the federal government. A substantial number of Americans in 1781 were foreign-born or had close ties with either Britain or continental Europe. They knew that a state church easily and readily becomes a corrupt church because it is not answerable to the people. Even more, they knew that when a civil government establishes and supports the church financially, that church will tend to be silent where civil corruption is concerned. When financially supported by the state, it will usually be unwilling to criticize or indict the hand that feeds it. The American War for Independence was extensively condoned by the colonial clergy. They were opposed to the establishment by Parliament or the British Crown of a state church. The colonial clergy were vocal in calling attention to the moral failures of British royal rule. As a result, the colonists felt very strongly, when the Constitution was adopted, that the great need of the United States was a free church in a free state. They wanted a free church precisely because they felt the need for a strong and independent voice to call attention to the religious and moral issues in politics. They felt it was necessary for the church to speak freely and effectively without being silenced by state control. The whole purpose of the First Amendment was thus to make sure that the church would have a free and uncontrolled voice in public affairs. The colonists were afraid of big government. They were even more afraid of the combination of a powerful civil government and a state church. The independence of the church was to help ensure the protection of the people from a power-hungry state. In fact, both in colonial and early constitutional America, an important aspect of church life was the preaching of election sermons to spell out the moral and religious issues at stake in civil and political affairs. It would be a disaster if that moral voice were silenced.